right, Clint. We're going in 3, 2, 1.
So if there's a multiverse, like in real life, does that mean some female version of me out there stabbed a guy without really thinking about it?
Wild.
The MCU multiverse is in full swing, and given that the 3 phases following the Infinity Saga have been dubbed the Multiverse Saga, it's safe to say the brains behind the MCU have been thinking this one out for quite a while.
Kevin?
It stands for Knowledge Enhanced Visual Interconnectivity Nexus.
From sacred timelines to incursions to secret wars, many in and outside of the MCU have their theories about this anomaly called the multiverse.
Rule number 1 of multiversal travel, you don't know anything.
However, the general consensus may not be the correct one.
Do you have a bit of experience in that arena?
Let's dive into all the reasoning as to why we believe the multiverse has been there all along, and wasn't, created by a wild Loki with a knife, right now.
There it is. What am I looking at?
If we can do this, go back in time, why don't we just find baby Thanos,
Prior to the end of the MCU Phase 3, there really hadn't been any mention of a multiverse. Even then, we had time travel, an exposition dump from the Ancient One about dark timelines without the Infinity Stones,
You're about 5 years too early.
and a joke from a villain scorned by his ex-boss who stole credit for his invention and named it Barf. There were even revelations of fabrics of reality being broken, such as the discovery of alternate dimensions. The Dark Dimension was revealed in the first Doctor Strange, the home of Dormammu and a place of undeniable power outside of time itself. There was also the Quantum Realm, discovered by Ant-Man, though it may prove soon that someone else had been there all along. However, the confirmation of a full-fledged multiverse really didn't come about until the Loki TV series. And in fact, that's where most people believe the MCU multiverse began.
What about the end of time?
It's just a void.
As explained by He Who Remains, the multiverse existed long ago. Or yesterday, depending on your concept of time. Eventually, He Who Remains, or at least a variant of his, found a way to make contact to another universe, within the vast multiverse of the MCU. At first they got along, meeting the alternate universe versions of themselves. They shared secrets, they shared technological advancements, and they shared their ability to travel the multiverse, meaning they went to find more versions of themselves. However, it's called a honeymoon phase for a reason. Before too long, the variants of the next great Marvel villain began fighting each other, creating the first multiversal war, which led to one victor being He Who Remains. He Who Remains then set up the TVA, and was believed to have effectively gotten rid of the multiverse. By creating the sacred timeline, clipping all other possible branches supposedly meant that only one universe existed. This was of course the main universe where the MCU films had taken place. Fast forward a few thousand years, or again, like 12 minutes, give or take, and a Loki variant named Sylvie was born, pruned by the TVA and captured. Loki in another timeline got a hold of the Tesseract one last time and used it to escape Asgardian custody that would eventually lead to his death. Loki then was recruited by the TVA to hunt down Sylvie, and through a series of unfortunate events, the two discovered that the mystery behind the time they had been living in was not what it had seemed. They both were pruned and sent to the end of time. Eventually, Sylvie escaped the clutches of the TVA and along with Loki got past the guard dog Goliath, and made it to the Citadel at the end of time, home of He Who Remains. After a long conversation, He Who Remains basically goaded Sylvie into killing him, which in turn allowed the sacred timeline to split off into all these different branches, known affectionately as the MCU Multiverse. Prior to this badly timed stabbing, these other universes only didn't exist because He Who Remains didn't let them. We saw a bounty of Easter eggs at the end of time, such as a frog Thor, a giant yellow jacket helmet, and a helicopter owned by one purple wrinkly-chinned Mad Titan. It is believed that He Who Remains after winning the war was able to erase these other universes by pruning them, and sending them to the end of time to be devoured by Goliath.
Don't tell me I'm a disappointment.
By doing this, He Who Remains and the TVA made it so that the multiverse did not exist. But what if that's not the case? What if He Who Remains went through this whole scheme merely to give the illusion that he had destroyed the multiverse? What if instead of taking every existent timeline and weaving it into one, he instead only got his hands on a few, but left the rest of the multiverse untouched and unable to be reached by any of those who existed within his perfect sacred timeline? This is where I would insert a whole bunch of quantum theory and science gobbledygook, if I had any idea what I was talking about. But don't worry, luckily in my college physics class I spent the whole time reading comic books instead. So let's dive in further as to what this possible new theory suggests. That instead of the multiverse in the MCU being created at the end of the Loki TV series, perhaps it had been there the whole time. This new theory suggests that He Who Remains' sacred timeline was simply a singular universe that was prevented from becoming multiple by pruning activities of the TVA.
Bringing peace by reorganizing the multiverse into a single timeline.
One universe is capable of becoming many when an infinite amount of events along that timeline are constantly creating new branches. However, this would only stop He Who Remains from causing similar universes to exist. Simple changes like Loki being born a female or Star-Lord not punching Thanos in the face at the most crucial point in the battle. But that doesn't explain why in the Multiverse of Madness we randomly get thrown through the universe that is entirely made out of paint. You see, this and many other universes were likely existing all along, only with the inability to reach them. It's true that killing He Who Remains definitely opened the door to these universes that had not been there before. For example, it's likely that just about every universe in the What If TV series was allowed to exist because He Who Remains was killed. All of these slight changes that created these episodes likely would have been pruned if the TVA were still around at this point. But there are several examples that point to the fact that perhaps other universes were existing before He Who Remains took a faithful dagger to the heart. And yes, more than just the paint one. Think all the way back to the year 2002, even though it definitely wasn't planned in the minds of the producers and filmmakers at the time.
Lie!
Tobey Maguire's Spider-Man swings on screen and into all of our hearts. 10 years later, Andrew Garfield would do the same thing. These universes were vastly different, not even containing the Avengers, and showing Peter Parker to look nothing like the Peter Parker of the MCU. Truthfully, Peter Parker was likely the only thing in this universe that seems to remain consistent. That and maybe J.K. Simmons being an angry guy with a mustache. These Spider-Man universes likely existed outside of the sacred timeline, and they were only able to cross over with the main MCU multiverse once the barrier had been broken. This is why there is such a disconnect between the similar universes of the Loki TV series and the wild jump in reality to Doctor Strange in the Multiverse of Madness.
Maybe we think a bit more about this, huh?
It's likely that instead of creating the multiverse, the death of He Who Remains simply opened several barriers to access the wide multiverse that had already been there, existing beyond the sacred timeline. One example of this is Doctor Strange's spell in Spider-Man No Way Home. I think this moment happened at the same quote-unquote time as the death of He Who Remains. This spell is a simple forgetting spell, and has likely been used by sorcerers on multiple occasions.
That spell travels the dark borders between known and unknown reality. It's too dangerous.
Even used by Doctor Strange before. Now granted, yes, he did mess it up this time thanks to some interference from Peter, but are you telling me that this is the first time in all of history that a sorcerer has messed up a forgetting spell like this? No, I think there would have been several other instances of accidental multiversal crossovers, but only if in the past the sorcerer's mistakes had the capability of accessing the rest of the multiverse. This time, when the spell was corrupted at the same moment that the gates to the multiverse were opened, several villains from several other universes began to pour through. This is why Andrew Garfield and Tobey came through to the MCU at this exact moment in time. I do have another theory that may be linked to not the start of the multiverse, but instead the opening of the floodgates that allowed the characters we know to travel between worlds. There is one supremely powerful being in the entire multiverse, with the power to travel between universes. And she just so happens to be a teenage girl. America Chavez has a mysterious power, but not mysterious in the sense that we know what it is. Mysterious in the sense that we don't really know how or why she has it. She's also the only version of herself in any universe, making her an extremely unique character. But why was she created? And clearly she's only been around for 13 years or so. So what caused this massive energy to appear in this form of life? I think the birth of America Chavez was also timed with the death of He Who Remains. I think America Chavez was born in the right place at the right time to absorb some energy from the gates of the multiverse being opened to the main sacred timeline. She may have even been created from this happening. The fact that she is so young and her existence is so new may point to the idea that the ability to travel the multiverse had not been around prior to her being born. There's also dreaming. As far as we know, characters had been having dreams since the beginning of the MCU. Dreaming was confirmed to be a way to peer into an alternate universe and see what an alternate version of yourself is doing. While we may not have had access to other universes in the sense that we could not visit them prior to the death of He Who Remains, the fact that people were able to dream before the sacred timeline split off shows us that perhaps those universes were always out there, even though it didn't seem like it. So that's the theory. The multiverse was not created by the death of He Who Remains, but instead it was revealed after the man who had been hiding it from the rest of the universe was out of the way. His variants were always there waiting to come back. They just didn't have access to his timeline, a timeline that he made sure would never create the versions of himself who would seek to take over. Now that he is out of the way, not only will this main sacred timeline continue to branch out, but the other universes that were previously inaccessible to us have now become available. So if that's the case, where do we go from here? We know that the next phases of the MCU, phases 4, 5, and 6, will collectively be known as the Multiverse Saga. If that's the case, there's not really anywhere else to go, right? I guess the MCU just ends after phase 6. Wait, can you hear that? Sounds like an entire board of people in suits at Disney laughing in unison. Truthfully though, where else can you go once you've tackled the multiverse? The only way for the MCU to continue on after this epic saga is to either find a way to live with it, or more realistically, get rid of the multiverse altogether. There are a couple of theories from my own head and from the comic books that could point as to how this could be done. The next 2 Avengers films may give us some clues. In the comics, the more recent Secret Wars event, after which the movie will most likely be based on, saw the destruction of the entire multiverse. Victor Von Doom, who has yet to be confirmed by the actual studio but has basically been confirmed in the minds of just about anyone paying attention, was able to steal some power from the Beyonders, a race of beings so powerful that they can manipulate matter and energy at will, and exist beyond the multiverse. Oh, I get it, that's why they're called that. The Beyonders had effectively destroyed the entire multiverse, but Victor Von Doom, who as I said was able to steal some of their power, used it to create an entire new world, transporting characters from a few universes onto this world and brainwashing them to be his slaves. It was only Reed Richards who was able to outthink Dr. Doom, who had essentially become a god on this new world. Many of the same old song and dance happens. You know, they do battle. But instead of the good guy winning and the bad guy losing, everything sort of got reset. The Black Panther was sent back in time by the Infinity Gauntlet, and Dr. Doom returned to his castle in Latveria. Now, a lot of stuff needs to fall into place before we get to this event if it's going to be entirely comic accurate. And if events like Civil War and Ragnarok in the MCU are any indication, it's likely that the movies will take some liberties with the comic stories. The Beyonders could appear and destroy the multiverse, as they did in the comics. There is also a comic storyline where Doom captures several of the Beyonders' henchmen, called Molecule Men, and uses them to fight the Beyonders before they could destroy the entire multiverse. This effort leaves about 12 universes left standing. The epic conclusion of this multiverse saga has to see the multiverse go away, in my opinion. This could be done by following the Secret Wars story pretty closely, or adapting aspects of multiple stories. Secret Wars could bring together characters from multiple universes who have to stop the Beyonders from destroying the entire multiverse, but the casualties could leave only the Earth 616 timeline remaining, allowing us to go forth and tell more stories without the issues of the multiverse interfering. I, however, could see this going down in a different way. After the Secret Wars story has concluded, it's quite possible that someone will simply replace He Who Remains as the keeper of the sacred timeline.
Reincarnation, baby.
Once again, shutting an unknowing universe off from the rest of the dangers of the multiverse. There are several characters up to the task. Dr. Doom himself could use the powers of the Beyonders to accomplish this feat, which would see him sitting on a throne of a new castle, only this time at the end of time. There's also another version of He Who Remains called Lord Immortus. Lord Immortus could win the second multiversal war that may even happen in the Kang dynasty, defeating Kang the Conqueror and taking the throne of his predecessor, He Who Remains. There's also Loki.
I believe him.
You believe what? That a bazillion boogeymen are going to turn up just because we give people free will?
Loki wanted to stop Sylvie from killing He Who Remains in the first place. These next few phases could see Loki in a redemption arc, trying to restore the sacred timeline and eventually get a throne of his own, but only because he knows it is what's best for the multiverse. Whether the multiverse is destroyed or the characters find a way to get back to normal, there's no doubt in my mind that the multiverse has been here all along. It may cease to exist going forward after Secret Wars, but that would require feats of power not yet seen in the entire MCU multiverse. The Beyonders themselves are the pinnacle of power in Marvel Comics, so introducing them means that there's very little places left to go afterwards. Of course, there are still fun stories to tell. Eternals will still fight Celestials, vampires need to be introduced, and who else could possibly turn into some version of the Hulk? Galactus is still out there waiting, and we've only begun to scratch the surface of the word mutation.
And when are we getting the X-Men?
I cannot tell you that.
There are still a bevy of stories that could be told within a singular timeline in the MCU. However, the multiverse is officially open and accessible to all of our favorite characters, and some of them seem to have already begun their journey in trying to stop whatever horrors the multiverse has to offer. But with that being said, there are so many possibilities as to what could happen. Gamora has already come back from another universe. Who's to say old long-forgotten characters couldn't make their reappearance as well? Plus, we've already seen some of our favorite movie series crossovers. What's to stop Darth Vader from teaming up with Dr. Doom in the future? Okay, I agree, that sounds horrible and cheap, but I'm just saying the same company owns both, and the laws of the multiverse seem to be never-ending. Oh well, at the end of the day, the multiverse will be around for at least a little while. But I think it's safe to say that a single knife through an ordinary man's heart was not the cause of its creation.
See you soon.
Truthfully, this is a goldmine. The MCU has found a way to tell literally unlimited stories for an infinite amount of time. At least until some angry variant takes out their aggression on Kevin Feige. What do you think? Was the multiverse there all along?